Welcome to Bite-Sized L&D, your quick, no-nonsense update on the latest in workplace learning. Today, we're tackling the strategic implications of HR and learning and development, reporting structures, and how aligning them with the CFO can impact organizational goals. We'll also delve into why HR should have a direct line to the CEO to boost long-term growth and innovation. All right, let's get straight into it.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another deep dive on Bite-Sized L&D. I'm Donna, and as always, I'm here with my co-host, the ever-insightful Yakov Lasker. Today, we're tackling something that might sound a bit inside baseball, but trust me, it affects every single person in your organization.
Thanks, Donna. And you're absolutely right about this being more important than people realize. We're talking about organizational reporting structures today, specifically why so many companies make what seems like a logical decision that turns out to be an absolute strategic catastrophe.
Ooh, strong words. Lay it on me, Yakov.
Well, here's the scenario that plays out in countless organizations. HR and learning and development end up reporting to the chief financial officer instead of the CEO. On the surface, it makes total sense, right? The CFO controls the budget. People are often the biggest expense. And hey, someone needs to keep those costs in check.
Right, and I bet a lot of our listeners are thinking, what's wrong with that? My CFO is super competent and trustworthy. And you know what? They probably are. But here's where things get interesting. And by interesting, I mean problematic.
Exactly. The research shows that while only 13% of organizations have HR reporting to the CFO, it's still surprisingly common. And when it happens, it creates this fundamental misalignment between what HR and L&D are supposed to do and how their success gets measured.
So walk me through why this seems logical in the first place. Because I'm guessing there's a pretty compelling case that gets made in boardrooms across the country.
Oh, absolutely. Picture this. You're a growing company, maybe started as a small business. Initially, whoever handled payroll also handled the basic HR stuff. Benefits, compliance, maybe some hiring. That person naturally reported to finance because, well, they were essentially doing accounting work with a people twist.
Makes sense. And as the company grows, they just keep that structure?
Exactly. It's organizational inertia. Plus, CFOs are typically the most trusted lieutenants of CEOs. They're seen as the responsible adults in the room who keep costs under control. So when HR issues come up, it feels natural to say, hey, CFO, you handle this too.
And let's be honest, people are expensive. Salaries, benefits, training costs. It all adds up fast. So having the money person oversee the people function probably feels like good financial discipline.
You've hit on something crucial there, Donna. This whole approach treats people as a cost center rather than an investment, and that's where the wheels start coming off the bus. But here's what makes it even worse. CFOs are fundamentally wired for administration, not innovation or production or cooperation. Their entire skill set is built around managing what already exists, not creating what could be.
That's such an important distinction. So when you put someone whose expertise is in administrative control in charge of functions that need to drive innovation and people development, you're setting up a fundamental mismatch.
Right. Because when your boss's primary job is to cut costs and maximize efficiency, suddenly every L&D program, every retention initiative, every employee development opportunity has to justify itself in immediate, no quantifiable financial terms. And here's where it gets really messy. This creates massive tension with other C-level executives.
Oh, how so?
Think about it. The COO is focused on operational excellence and scaling the business. The CTO is pushing for innovation and technical advancement. The Chief Marketing Officer wants to build brand and attract talent. But when HR reports to the CFO, people decisions get filtered through a purely cost-saving lens that often conflicts with what these other executives need.
So you've got the CTO saying, we need to invest in upskilling our developers in AI technologies. And the CFO-controlled HR is like, that's a $50,000 expense. What's the immediate ROI?
Exactly. And in theory, the CFO should be aligned with the company's operations, product development, marketing, and sales strategy. But here's the dirty little secret. This rarely happens in real life. Most product strategy meetings, the CFO isn't even in the room.
Wait, really? That seems like a pretty big disconnect.
It's more common than you'd think. CFOs often operate in their own silo, focused on the financial reports and budget management, while the actual business strategy gets developed without their input. So when HR reports to someone who's disconnected from the core business strategy, how can HR possibly support that strategy effectively?
And here's the kicker. Some of the most important people investments simply can't be measured that way, at least not in the short term. How do you put a precise dollar figure on improved employee engagement? Or better leadership skills? Or a stronger company culture?
Ooh, and I bet this creates some pretty uncomfortable conversations when L&D comes to the CFO and says, "We need $50,000 for a leadership development program."
You're reading my mind. The CFO is going to ask, what's the ROI? How do we know this will generate more than 50,000 in value? And honestly, that's not an unreasonable question. But the L&D professional is stuck trying to prove the value of something that might pay dividends for years in ways that are hard to quantify.
So the CFO's doing their job, protecting the bottom line. But that fundamental orientation creates this constant tension with what L&D is trying to accomplish.
Exactly. And it gets worse. When HR reports to finance, they get pushed one step away from strategic decision-making. Think about it. Instead of having a direct line to the CEO, where they can influence company-wide people strategy, every initiative has to first convince the CFO, who then might advocate up to the CEO.
That's like playing telephone with your career development strategy. And we all know how well that game works out.
Ha! Perfect analogy. But seriously, this distance from strategic decision-making is huge. The research shows that 61% of organizations have HR reporting directly to the CEO, and there's a good reason for that. When people decisions are made at the highest level, they're more likely to align with long-term business goals rather than just quarterly cost targets.
I'm starting to see why you called this a strategic catastrophe earlier. But let's talk about L&D specifically, because I imagine this creates some unique challenges for learning and development teams.
Oh, it's particularly brutal for L&D. Here's why. Learning and development is inherently about long-term growth and capability building. You're investing in people today so they can drive business results tomorrow, next quarter, next year. But CFOs are often measured on short-term financial performance.
So you've got this fundamental mismatch in time horizons.
Exactly. And it shows up in how L&D programs get evaluated. Instead of asking, are we building the capabilities our organization needs for the future? The question becomes, can we prove this training will generate X dollars in savings or revenue by the end of the quarter?
And that probably leads to focusing on the wrong kinds of learning programs, right? Like, maybe you invest in technical skills training because it's easier to measure, but you skip the leadership development that's actually more critical long term.
Absolutely. You end up with what I call metrics-driven mediocrity. Programs get designed around what's easy to measure rather than what's actually most valuable. The research shows that while 96% of L&D leaders want to report on business impact, only 17% are actually doing it effectively.
Yikes. So we're measuring the wrong things, and even when we try to measure the right things, we're not very good at it.
That's the sad reality. And when L&D reports to the CFO, this pressure to prove immediate financial value becomes even more intense. But here's another layer that makes this really problematic. CFOs fundamentally view people as costs, not assets. They're typically less people-oriented and less empathetic by nature, which sounds harsh, but it's actually just a reflection of their training and role.
Right. They're trained to look at numbers, not navigate human complexity.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. This mindset influences who they hire for HR roles. When a CFO is hiring HR leaders, they're often looking for people who think like them, administratively focused, cost-conscious, compliant. They're not necessarily looking for the empathetic, people-first leaders that actually make HR effective.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about reporting structure, it's about who ends up in HR leadership positions in the first place.
Precisely! And you can see this play out in everyday decisions. I heard a perfect example from an HR professional recently. During a discussion about flexible work policies, the CFO said, "Why should we give them the right to come only 2 days to the office? I come every day." That's such a Diane Xing CFO approach, applying their own experience and priorities to everyone else, without considering different roles, working styles, or what actually drives productivity.
That's pretty telling. It shows a complete lack of understanding about what motivates different types of workers or how to create policies that actually support performance.
And this problem gets even worse in modern, technology-driven companies. Most CFOs come from traditional business backgrounds and represent what I'd call old industry thinking. They often don't understand high-tech environments, software development cycles, or the unique people dynamics that drive innovation in these spaces.
Can you give me an example of what you mean by that?
Sure, in a tech company, you might have developers who do their best work at 2 a.m., or creative teams that need long periods of uninterrupted focus, or research teams where breakthrough moments can't be scheduled. A traditional CFO looks at that and sees inefficiency or lack of structure. They don't understand that forcing everyone into a 9 to 5, office-based model might actually destroy the very creativity and productivity they're trying to optimize.
Right, because they're applying industrial age management thinking to knowledge, work, and creative processes.
Exactly. And here's where this creates a cascading problem. When HR reports to someone who doesn't understand the business, the products, or the unique challenges of different departments, how can HR possibly be effective business partners? They end up making policies and programs in a vacuum, without really understanding what each division actually needs to succeed.
So instead of HR being strategic partners who understand the business deeply, they become this disconnected administrative function that applies one-size-fits-all solutions.
Precisely. And this makes me wonder if we're thinking about organizational structure all wrong. Maybe instead of having one centralized HR function reporting to the CFO, each major division should have its own HR and L&D support that really understands their specific challenges, culture, and success factors.
That's a fascinating idea. So, like, the engineering division would have HR people who actually understand software development culture, and the sales division would have HR support that gets the unique pressures and motivations of sales teams.
This is making me think about talent retention too. Like if you're constantly focused on minimizing costs, you might miss the bigger picture of what it actually costs to lose good people.
Oh, that's a perfect example. The cost of turnover is often hidden and spread out over time. You've got recruitment costs, training costs for replacements, lost productivity during transitions, the impact on team morale. It's substantial, but not always obvious on a monthly P&L statement.
And if your L&D team is reporting to someone whose job is to watch every penny going out the door, they might not get the investment needed to keep people engaged and growing in their roles.
Exactly. It becomes this vicious cycle where underinvestment in people development leads to higher turnover, which leads to higher costs, which leads to even more pressure to cut L&D spending. It's completely backwards.
So let's talk about the skills mismatch here. Because even if we have an amazing CFO who really cares about people, are they actually equipped to guide HR and L&D strategy?
That's such an important point, Donna. The skills that make someone an excellent financial leader are often quite different from, and sometimes in direct opposition to, the skills needed for effective people leadership. Finance is about precision, control, risk mitigation, staying within established parameters.
Right. They're the check-the-box people, which is incredibly valuable for financial management.
Absolutely, but people development is more about vision, creativity, taking calculated risks on human potential, thinking outside the box. One expert I came across put it perfectly. They said a leader needs to be a visionary with talent for out-of-the-box thinking, while finance professionals are often focused on staying within the box and controlling variables.
And there's nothing wrong with either approach in their proper context. But when you put a control-oriented mindset in charge of a function that needs to be innovative and growth-focused, you get suboptimal results.
Exactly. Plus, think about the message this sends to the rest of the organization. When HR and L&D report to finance, you're essentially telling your workforce that people are primarily a cost to be managed rather than an asset to be developed.
Ooh, that's a cultural signal I hadn't considered. Employees are pretty smart. They notice these organizational structures and draw conclusions about what the company actually values.
Right. And if you want to attract and retain top talent, especially in today's market where people are increasingly focused on growth and development opportunities, that signal can be really damaging. It suggests that people development is an afterthought rather than a strategic priority.
So, what about those situations where it might seem unavoidable? Like maybe you're a smaller company and your CEO is already stretched thin with a bunch of direct reports.
Good question. And I get it. There's definitely a span of control issue as companies grow. But here's the thing. If you truly believe that people are your most important asset, then people strategy should be one of the things the CEO makes time for, even if it means delegating other responsibilities.
That's a really good point. It's about prioritization and what you're willing to invest your most senior leadership attention in.
Exactly. And if you absolutely must have HR report to someone other than the CEO, there are better alternatives than the CFO. Some companies have HR report to the COO, especially if operations includes a strong people element. Others create a chief people officer role that sits at the same level as the CFO.
I like that idea. Having people strategy represented at the same level as financial strategy, rather than subordinated to it.
Yes, it's about creating what Jack Welch called the golden triangle, CEO, CFO, and HR all working together as equals, rather than in a hierarchy where financial considerations always trump people considerations.
So let's get practical for a minute. Say someone listening to this realizes their organization has HR and L&D reporting to the CFO, and they're thinking, "Oh no, we're doing this wrong." What should they actually do about it?
Great question. First, don't panic. Organizational structure is important, but it's not everything. You can still do good L&D work, even in a suboptimal reporting structure. But if you want to advocate for change, start by building a compelling business case.
What would that look like?
Focus on strategic alignment and competitive advantage. Show how your current structure might be limiting your ability to respond to talent challenges. Develop future leaders, or build the capabilities needed for long-term growth. Use language that resonates with business leaders. Talk about talent risks, competitive positioning, strategic capability building.
And probably avoid framing it as "we don't like reporting to the CFO," right? Make it about what's best for business outcomes.
Absolutely. Frame it positively. Something like to maximize our people investment and align talent strategy with business strategy. We should consider having HR report directly to the CEO. Focus on the opportunity rather than the problem.
Makes sense. Any other practical advice for L&D professionals who find themselves in this situation right now?
Build relationships across the organization, especially with business leaders who can speak to the value of your programs. If you can get line managers and department heads talking about how L&D initiatives have helped their teams perform better, that creates a powerful coalition for change.
And I imagine being extra disciplined about measurement and storytelling becomes crucial when you're reporting to a finance-oriented leader.
100%. You need to get really good at translating people outcomes into business language. That doesn't mean compromising on what you do, but it does mean getting better at explaining why it matters in terms your audience cares about.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation, Yakov. I think a lot of our listeners are going to be looking at their org charts with fresh eyes after this.
I hope so, because here's the bottom line. And this is something every senior leader should understand. If you want people development to be strategic rather than just transactional, it needs to be positioned strategically in your organization.
Right. Structure follows strategy, but structure also shapes strategy. If you bury people development under cost management, don't be surprised when it gets treated like a cost center instead of a growth driver.
Perfectly said. And in today's economy, where talent is often the primary differentiator between companies, that's a competitive risk you can't afford to take.
So maybe you can apply this thinking to your own organization. Take a look at where HR and L&D sit in your org chart. Ask yourself, does this structure support our people strategy, or does it constrain it? And if it's constraining it, what can you do to advocate for change?
And remember, this isn't about being anti-finance or anti-CFO. CFOs play a crucial role and should absolutely be involved in people strategy. But they should be partners in that strategy, not gatekeepers who filter everything through a cost management lens.
Great distinction. Collaboration, not subordination.
Exactly right.
Well, this has been another fantastic deep dive, folks. If this episode got you thinking about organizational design and people strategy, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line and let us know how your organization handles these relationships.
And if you're dealing with any of these challenges in your own workplace, remember that change is possible, but it usually starts with someone willing to make the case for why things could be better.
Absolutely. Thanks for tuning in to Bite-Sized L&D. Until next time, keep learning and keep growing.
See you next episode. As we wrap up today's discussion, we've explored how having HR and learning and development report to the CFO can misalign goals by focusing more on cost than people development. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and colleagues so they can also stay updated on the latest news and gain powerful insights. Stay tuned for more updates.